Okay, so then we'll start the English guided walking tour, and we'll start by going down to the exhibition here in this museum. So then first of all I would like to then welcome you to this walking tour of Bryggen. The tour includes a visit to 3 different museums. We're starting here in Bryggen's museum, and then we'll go over to Skjøtstuen, a museum right next to the St. Mary's Church, and then we'll end up in the Hanseatic Museum. And we'll also go around outside a bit and walk between some of the tenements standing today. So it's mainly then a walking tour through the history of this part of Bergen, through the history of Bryggen.
The museum features the actual remains of permanent settlements found on the site, as well as reconstructions of what the houses looked like.
So what we see then here in front of us are the remains of 5 different houses.
4 of these houses date back to what is the earliest known settlement of Bryggen in the years approximately 1150 through 1170. And later when we walk outside, we'll find that this wooden style of building remained much the same up until about the 18th century. This sketch shows us what they believe Bryggen looked like back about the year 1150 and helps us visualize what the remains of these houses stood for in those days.
So Bryggen means the wharf, and since the 1340s Bryggen has been the name then used on this eastern side of the harbour. So here then in this museum we'll concentrate on the period around the 1300s, the period that we call the High Middle Ages, or a period from the 1150s into the 1350s.
Part of the museum recreates the ancient harbor activities. Here we see a model partly reconstructed of what's known as the Bryggen ship. Each ship could hold about 3 tons of dried fish, called stockfish, and they were particularly active in the 13th century through the 16th. Here you see us holding one of the dried codfish. That was the most common kind of species that was dried and sent out as stockfish in this great trade system. Most of these fish were caught in the northern part of Norway, and then they dried them in the very fierce winds for about 2 months before shipping them down to Bergen. They also shipped cod liver oil as well as timber. The dried fish accounted for 80% of the goods that were leaving Bergen. And this map shows some of the trade routes that connected Bergen with England and particularly with northern Germany. England was a source of wool, and Germany supplied the grain and the beer.
So from 1360 and for 400 years German merchants lived here at Bryggen, and they were then in charge of the Norwegian foreign trade directed from Bergen, especially when it came to, again, stockfish and the cod liver oil. So by then the German towns in the northern part of Germany, they had entered into a league, the Hanseatic League, and all of these towns, they were then sort of independent, and they had their own town councils. But to strengthen their trade, they entered then into a league, and they also then had 3 or 4 foreign settlements, and one of these colonies was then in Bergen.
In this kingdom then, Bergen was the capital, so Bergen was actually the first capital of Norway. And around the 1300s, Bergen had almost 7,000 inhabitants. And life was pretty difficult for these people. The average life expectancy was only 20 to 30 years. That reflects, of course, a high rate of infant mortality, so if you survived childhood, you had a chance to live to be 40 or 50. Among the interesting artifacts is a double seater from a communal toilet. 14 years of archaeological work here have resulted in this very innovative display that shows you some of the artifacts found on the site, as well as the remains of the buildings themselves. It's a window to the past that brings us back over 700 years.
So now we'll leave this museum and go outside.
So you'll find this tour is a real good value when you're in Bergen. For the price of the guided tour also provides for admission to the 3 main little museums in the heart of town. And the guide explains everything.
Hi. So please just go inside and take a seat. So one could then find German merchants here then from the town's 1st century, at least from the end of the 12th century. just like the other merchants, they would usually just stay here in the summer season and go back home. And for a period, for about 100 years, they gradually then brought themselves in, and then in 1360 they established a German office here, then connected to the Hanseatic League. And in one tenement, if you say that there were about 10 different houses, then almost 100 people should share this assembly room. So now we'll pass another assembly room, and we'll go downstairs and see the kitchen belonging to that assembly room. So then they came together, and then they made a fire here in this long fireplace.
They suspended their cooking pots at different heights over the flames so that they could carefully adjust the heating of the cooking. After the food was cooked, it was brought upstairs to that communal dining room that we were just in earlier. One of the rules for the kitchen was that there always had to be at least one sober journeyman standing by and a bucket filled with water in case of a fire. Finishing up the second of our 3 museums, we walk outside into the Bryggen itself, and here we find that familiar pattern of the double tenement with the passageway in between, and staircases and bridges connecting them at the upper levels. Today it's all protected from fire by a modern sprinkler system.
And you'll also see later on that there will be a lot of different external flights of stairs leading up to the first and the second floor. So the tenements that we can see now, they are from the beginning of the 1700s. Because in 1702 there was an enormous fire in Bergen that destroyed 90% of the town. So the tenements here then, they were built immediately after that fire, so if you say from 1704. But some of the stone cellars that you can see are then far older, at least from the 15th or the 16th century.
The museum intentionally limits the size of these tours to a small group so it's easy to hear the guide and to have a little conversation with her. In the old days, ropes and pulleys were used to lift things up to the second floor. Nowadays, nobody lives here in the Bryggen anymore. It's probably the 1st century where nobody has lived here, but it's still a very lively spot. There's artists with their studios, and there's many stores and a few very nice restaurants in the Bryggen. It's one of the few sites in Norway that's been recognized by the United Nations as a World Heritage Site, so the Norwegian government is taking every effort to preserve it.
The houses behind behind this upper street, that was where the farmers had their houses and homes.
The final stop is a typical household of a Hanseatic merchant, showing his warehouse, his office with books, and the bedrooms.
So in the northern part of Norway there were then about 10,000 to 15,000 fishermen involved in this trade with the merchants down here at Bryggen. And they would then come with their fish twice. Once in May, when they mainly brought the fresh fish, and then also in July, from July to September, when they came with the dried fish, the stockfish. And the fishermen, they would always then travel or come from the northern part of Norway together with about 100 to 200 boats. So again, the harbour would be filled up with ships. So the cut fish were then cut all along the spine and to the tail. And then they removed all the entrails before they then dried it like this, almost in 2 parts.
When properly dried in the sun and the wind, this codfish could last for 20 years. So it was a very good item for trading and storage. So even after being stockpiled for 20 years, you just soak it in water and you can still eat it. An amazing product. And the Germans traded grain and some tools in return for the codfish. So this was very much a mutually beneficial trade arrangement. Again, all part of the Hanseatic League.
And here then you see the towns here in the northern part of Germany were then the members of the Hanseatic League. And only towns in the northern part of Germany and in the Netherlands could then be members or be Hanseatic cities. So then they had 4 foreign offices, with one here in London, one in Bryggen, and one in Bergen, and then also then one here up in Russia, in Novgorod.
So Norway supplied the fish, England supplied the wool was woven into textiles in the Low Countries, and Germany supplied the grain. It was quite a network.
So here then, inside his room, the manager had a little hatch with a window behind. So this he could open whenever and just take a brief look at his visitors before he decided if he wanted them to let them into his office. And above the door, you see then the symbol of the office here in Bergen. It was a part of an eagle, or half an eagle, together with a golden stockfish and then a crown on top.
Inside the office, the manager kept his ledger, which, just like today, is a very important book to let him know how the business is doing and keep track of the profits and loss with the trading of the fish from the northern part of the country. The sleeping quarters were very tight. There's only 4 bunk beds, and 8 young trainees had to sleep in these 4 beds. They had doors that would close to keep out the winter chill because no fires were allowed in here. The manager has some nice furniture in his office. So the building had many functions. It was the warehouse, the office, as well as the sleeping house. But the cooking was done in a separate building. We've learned all these things and more in our walking tour from the Bryggen Museum. It was not an easy life for these German merchants living in Bergen, in a foreign outpost in a strange land, far away from their homeland. Because of the danger of fire in these tenements, they didn't allow any heating, so you can imagine how cold it was in the Norwegian winters. But these precautions have helped to preserve the buildings for us to enjoy today, and now they've been converted into a shopping mall, of course. What else? You can have lunch, there's wonderful restaurants there, and the whole city is one big shopping mall. This is the downtown square at the heart of Bergen. There's some modern buildings, of course, in the city today, and there's extensive parklands around the city as well as a large park in the middle of town. A number of great restaurants. Norwegian food emphasizes fish and potatoes, vegetables. All your standard European items are here. And in the summer when we visit, it's mild enough that you can eat outdoors for lunch or outdoors for dinner. There's a large park in the middle of town with a beautiful fountain and a lake. This is the Lillelungavarten. The Bergensers love to come out here on a sunny summer afternoon and picnic or just sunbathe, relax on the grass. Remember, they have a long, dark winter when it's kind of cold, so during the summer, the day seems to go on forever. And this park in the middle of town is a nice place to enjoy it from. Right next door is the train station. This is the terminus of the main line that comes from Oslo. You recall at the beginning of the program we were on the train from Oslo. We came most of the way to Bergen by train, and then we took the boat, so we never did see the train station itself in the middle of town, so we wanted to take a walk over and have a look and show it to you. And very conveniently, there's a tourist information office in the train station. And here you can buy your tickets for Norway in a nutshell. That's the one-day trip that will take you from Bergen back up to Myrdal, and you take the Flam Railway down to the fjords and the bus back up to Voss and the train back to Bergen. On the other side of town is the university campus, and here they have a very interesting culture history museum. And the admission is free, so let's go on inside and have a quick look around. You can see items that date back to the Stone Ages. You can see suits of armor. There's wooden implements. There's farming implements. The cultural and historical materials have particular reference to Western Norway. You'll see traditional costumes and furniture and the looms they weave their clothing on. There's fine collections from the prehistoric and medieval times right up to the present, including some typical farmhouse furniture. They have a nice three-dimensional model of the Bryggen itself that gives you quite an overview of that historic collection of wooden buildings that we've just been walking through. You can see how densely populated Bergen was 600 years ago. It was the largest city in Norway and the capital of the country. Gives you a real feeling for life in those days. There's unique archaeological artifacts. There's pieces of medieval religious art, collections of tools and utensils from the Stone Age. There's furniture and folk objects from the urban and rural areas. and a quite extensive ethnographic collection. Shows you what the life of the Sami was like, the reindeer herders. And next door is the Natural History Museum. There are several other interesting museums in Bergen. There's also an aquarium